You're in the gym, you're training hard, but you're just not seeing results. What's going on? This is why your training program sucks and what to do about it. What's going on, guys? It's Coach Dan here with another video following up on my latest article, Why Your Training Program Sucks and How to Make It Better. You can find that article on my website, covertfitwell.com, as well as my Substack at covertfitwell. I always encourage people to read the article, at least refer to it. You can skip down the bottom for a too long don't read, kind of TLDR, just to get a summary and the basic points of everything we're going to talk about here. So there are basically 5 reasons that I summarize in the article of the kind of the most common things I see. Now, first, I kind of introduced the article with, are you saying my program sucks, right? Someone might say, how do I know that my training program sucks? You talking about my program? The obvious one would be you're not getting results, right? Whatever the results you want to see, you're not getting them. But I think an insidious one for people that people don't realize is either directly a result of their training program or maybe something that they're omitting from their training program is that they're in pain. Whether it's in the gym, when leaving the gym, kind of creeps in hours to day or two later after the gym, or they just got some kind of low-level chronic nagging soreness pain. A lot of people just kind of accept or think, well, that's just part of it, or getting older. No, that's not true at all. It does not have to be true. Kinesiology has principles where if joints have the right mobility and you have the right head to toe stability and can utilize that mobility, you should not walk around in pain, and you should be able to strength train without pain, and strength training should make you better, not worse in any way. So we'll talk about that here, but also obviously it might not be your program itself if you're not getting results, right? It could be that you're not eating well, you're not eating enough, you're overweight, you're not sleeping enough, you're not sleeping well, your hormones are out of whack, you've too much life stress, right? There could be a ton of reasons why. This article, this video is going to focus on the reasons in your actual program that we see, okay? So assuming it's your program, the first reason, kind of summarized 5 different reasons why. The first and the biggest, the most basic foundational reason is you're not progressively overloading, okay? What that means effectively is you're not getting stronger. Progressive overload is a 101 principle in exercise science. The body will only adapt no matter what adaptation you want to force. So no matter what your goal is, the body will only adapt to you progressively, incrementally, gradually, right, within reason. And it might not happen every workout, especially if you're not a novice anymore, but over time, you should be able to see a progression of strength. Now, a lot of people will say, well, my goal is not to get stronger necessarily, right? I just want to look better, right? Fair. However, you still have to get stronger. In order to build muscle, you must get stronger in a certain rep range, which we'll talk about, plus eat slightly more than you burn. And likewise, if you're losing fat, you still have to aim to get stronger in order to build, and really in that phase, you're trying to preserve muscle as much as possible because you're going to have to eat slightly less than you burn. Okay, so I talk about in the article, I dispel this word tone that floats around. It's really just a gimmick. What people mean by that is effectively recomp. They want to preserve or build muscle if possible while getting leaner, while losing fat. And so, if unless you're a beginner or there's some other exceptions, but for the most part, you got to kind of, this is why bodybuilders do bulk and cut cycles, right? You got to kind of choose a direction that you're going to go. So just know that no matter what your goal, whether it's obviously if it's strength itself, if it's the mirror, if it's sports performance, if it's getting out of pain, which is very important, if we're using movement as medicine effectively, right? If we're using functional movement as a way to make joints feel better, to get you out of pain, to make you move better, you still have to apply within reason, within your working limits. You have to apply a progression. That's what makes the body adapt to anything. So first and foremost, you are not progressively overloading. You're not getting stronger. And I discussed in the article how again, if you're not training for maximal poundages and maximal loads, right, that doesn't mean necessarily that you always have to be putting weight on the bar. It could mean that you're doing more reps with the same weight. It could mean you're doing more sets and reps with the same weight. It could mean that you are taking shorter rests between a weight. It could mean that you are using different tempos, more, more of an eccentric or a lowering phase, right? There are many, many ways that you can get stronger, but it has to be a little bit harder. Again, might not be every workout. If you're a beginner, it can be and probably should be if you're doing everything right. But for intermediate to advanced lifters, over time, right, you should be seeing that progression. That's why tracking weights and whatnot, tracking reps, having a plan is important. Reason number two is that your training split is suboptimal. Okay, so this is a big one. I think a lot of people who hang around fitness understand progressive overload. I think this one is less looked at and understood even by some advanced lifters. And once you're an advanced lifter, you should kind of know what works for you, but you'd be surprised how many people are, like I said, maybe they're still getting results, but they're just beating the hell out of their joints. And or their nervous system. So when we say your training split, that means how many days a week you're training and what you're doing on those days. So I discussed a little bit in the article the history of the bodybuilding craze that took off during, obviously everyone knows, the Arnold era in the 70s. And what that really did was it put on the map, but first of all, $1 billion industry of supplements. Hint, hint, magazine supplements, an industry that was born to sell things. And so what became popular by really like the 80s was these, one main muscle group per day, 5, 6 days a week split where you bomb one muscle group with a ton of volume, 6, 8, 10 different exercises, a ton of sets and reps, everything to failure, right? And that can work. It can work typically for guys that are enhanced, right? They're performance enhanced. That's mainly who it works for. If you have very good muscle building genetics, it can also work. I've certainly seen it work. I would imagine if you're watching this video, that's probably not you. It was never me, I can tell you that. I never got any progress out of doing those types of splits. Just high volume in general, I never got any progress out of that. I was always hurt. Joints were aching, couldn't recover. So what most people don't understand is that you're not growing in the gym. The gym is a stimulus. You should be getting the minimum effective stimulus and then going home to rest and recover. And then I talk about in the article the principle of what we call frequency plus intensity. So how often you can hit a muscle group and how hard, how much you can apply progressive overload essentially is going to be greater than volume. Okay, so greater than doing a ton of sets and reps and exercises. So a lot of people, when they go in the gym, they focus on what I call junk volume. They do, let's say it's chest day, right? They'll do their bench press. They'll probably add another press, which I think is kind of overkill for most people. They'll go do a pec deck fly. They'll do a cable fly. They'll do dips. They'll do every angle, hit it from every angle under the sun. And I talk about in the article, for a bodybuilder who's at the peak of his genetics and on performance enhancement drugs and competing against other bodybuilders, where every little striation and angle and pose matters because everybody's a freak on stage, right? Yes, there can be merit to hitting things from all different angles. But for the general public, the person who just wants to look better, get stronger, get more confidence, feel better, you don't need to do that. And it's actually overkill because the ability to recover from that, and when we say recovery, what we really mean is, yes, a lot of people's muscle tissue, once they're adapted, will recover from that, but their nervous system and their joints won't. And the nervous system is really one of the key one. Even, a lot of people, their joints can be spared at least for years, beating them up. But the nervous system is not so forgiving. A lot of people are, I think, not, it's unless you're very perceptive, unless you're very in tune, it's hard to know when your nervous system is, when you're approaching sort of an overtraining state. A lot of people will get irritable, they won't sleep well, the weights move slower, their cognition kind of gets slower. If you know what to look for and you're tuned in, you can feel it. But I argue that for the vast majority of natural lifters out there, and especially if you're watching this video, I have only ever trained, even at my biggest and strongest, when I was powerlifting, the biggest, the leanest, the strongest I've ever been. I've gotten the most mileage out of 3 full body days a week, or at some points, and a lot of my clients do upper lower splits, so 2 upper body days, 2 lower days. So you start talking about 3, 4 days a week, not 6, not bombing one body part. I'm hitting the muscle group. I'm trying to give it the minimum effective stimulus I need. I'm going home, I'm eating, I'm resting, I'm doing everything I need to do. I should be able to train that muscle group again if I'm doing everything right in 48 to 72 hours. And I say in the article, if you want to get good at anything, would you do it more times a week, even if it was for a little bit less time than just one long time a week? Of course you would. I think people understand that in most cases, frequency is going to be a good thing to get proficient at anything. Your body doesn't respond very much differently, believe it or not. So 3, 4 days a week. And I also talk about in the article, this idea of like 2 hour workouts and bombing everything is 60 minutes max. Okay. You might do, and we'll talk about this later, a 15 to 30 minute warm up. And that's definitely advised, not including the warm up, 60 minutes max, 45 to 60 minutes. If you're doing more than that, number one, it's probably junk volume. And number two, you are cutting into your recovery time. And there's actually endocrinological evidence to that. You're really just beyond about 60 minutes. Really, it's like 45, but beyond about 60 minutes, you're really just jacking up more cortisol production. And anybody that knows about cortisol knows cortisol is, the stress hormone, the enemy of muscle gain, fat loss, basically the enemy of staying anabolic. So a lot of people don't understand less really is more if you're doing the right things the right way. I get more. A lot of guys are shocked in the gym when I tell them, that I only do 15 to 18 total exercises a week. And I'm moving, the same or bigger weights than people who are on, gear, on steroids are moving. And, I made a ton of progress never having used that stuff, especially from a natural, what I call hard gainer. So you don't need all that. When I break down more in the article, you can refer to, but I do break down sets and reps, and I talk about how, if your goal is maximum strength, if you're powerlifting or your Olympic weightlifting, things like that, obviously you're going to be doing a lot of training in that 1 to 5-ish rep range. If your goal is just to look good, feel good, right, build muscle, build reasonable strength, right, just kind of all around. Maybe you're an athlete. Generally 5 to 12 in the rep range is where you want to stay. Maybe a little higher on certain like smaller exercises, maybe for example lateral raises or things like that, you go up to 15, maybe even 20 here and there. But generally 5 to 12 on most exercises. And I say the bigger and more technical lift, so like a deadlift for example, keep that on the lower end. And if your training age is like younger, if you're not so strong yet, so your age as well as your training age, you want to train and you can train kind of more loads, lower reps. If you're older and you're a little more beat up or you're very strong, you want to train kind of towards the upper part of that range. Not as a hard and fast rule, but generally speaking. Um, and also you can train in the upper end of that range for obviously smaller movements like arm curls and tricep extension, 10 to 12 range. Obviously we don't be doing fives on our curls, right? But and I talk about sets. If you can't get a training effect in 2 to 4, really usually 2 to 3 top end sets, meaning you ramp up if you're fairly strong to 2 max sets with the same weight, good intensity, um, you are not you're either not doing the right exercises, you're not training intensely enough, you don't know how to progressively overload right. You don't need a million sets and reps, especially for each individual body part. You really just need to get stronger at the main movements I discuss in that section, compound movements. So hopefully most people know compound movements are multi-joint and then as such multi-muscle movements, so your squats, your deadlifts, your presses, your rows, etc. Not that there's no place for isolation movements like curls and lateral raises and things like that. And, even some machines sparingly, there's a few machines, right? But by and large, you want 70 to 80% of your program to be compound lifts that mass begets mass, right? So again, even if you're trying to lose fat, remember, you still got to get strong. Moving mass, right? Moving more weight is going to help you gain more, or if you're losing fat, preserve more muscle mass. There's absolutely evidence that the reason that closed chain compound movements with barbells, with dumbbells, with free weights effectively works so well is because there's a high what's called neuromuscular demand on those movements. It basically means that your body can sense like, wow, I'm moving a load that's as heavy as I am, maybe, right, or heavier than I am for a lot of people, and I better remember how to do this, and I better make the necessary adaptations, in which case, if I'm training right and eating right, that's build muscle, get stronger, build muscle, whatever. I'd better make those adaptations, because if I don't, this weight can crush me. Um, so, compound movements, 3-4 days a week. I talk about kind of last thing in that section. I mentioned in the cover picture for this article, it's a picture of Arnold when he was like 16, I think 15, 16. Looks better than me and most of us do now, which should show you how much genetics matter. Um, but most people don't know, long before the Olympia stuff and all the sauce, right? Arnold was training 3 full body days a week on what's called a Reg Park. Look up Reg Park. That was his hero. 5x5 program. And I trained that for the bulk of my career as a power lifter, as a kind of power builder. And I still train 3 days a week. It's a little modified now in ways, but you get great mileage. It works. There's no doubt about it. So just know that even Arnold himself didn't start the 2 hour to the death, a million different angles, a million different exercises. That was all Olympia, and that was all when he was on a ton of gear. His foundation, go look at him as a power lifter at age 17, 18 in Munich, Germany, was massive already, and he was not doing any of that shit. So very important to just note, your training split is probably not optimized. Third reason that you are not getting results, your training program sucks, is going to be poor exercise selection. So again, this kind of piggybacks on what I started to talk about. You're doing too many isolation movements. You're thinking you got to feel a burn. I hear this one a lot. Well, I do leg extensions because I feel a burn. I'm here to tell you that doesn't matter near as much as you think it does. Just get stronger. Don't worry about if you feel a burn or not. We could talk about what a burn is. It's not necessary. Again, if you're an advanced lifter, if you're really dialed in and you're bodybuilding, there's certainly merit in that. But for most people, we say meat and potatoes, right? Get strong at the big basic lifts until you're moving, until you're squatting, let's say double your body weight, deadlifting double, triple your body weight. You don't need to worry about what we call majoring in the minors. I talk about, I for a long time, and still I don't do that much of it. I never did any arm curls or direct arm work, and the biggest my arms ever were was when I was deadlifting 500 pounds as a power lifter. Doing heavy chin-ups, doing weighted chin-ups, pull-ups. So compound movements, get stronger. The other thing I break down in that article is you want to focus on, at least within those compound movements, functional movements. And I talk about how the word functional has become kind of commercialized, almost like a dirty word in fitness circles. True functional training is some of the most scientifically proven and driven and endorsed by physical therapists and kinesiologists and people who are writing textbooks, let's say, right? Some of my mentors. These movements are going to be movements that train joints in the way life utilizes them. And that's a great idea for longevity and keeping healthy. I think a lot of people, especially when they're younger, I know I certainly did, they take for granted. Joints don't last forever. Muscles can recover pretty much infinitely. Joints can't. Everyone knows you fully blow out a knee, right? You can get back, but it's hard, and you might not ever get exactly 100%. You might still hurt when it rains or when you move a certain way. Scar tissue is real, right? You want to be training for life too, no matter what your aesthetic or strength or sport goals are, right? You got to make sure you're healthy, because longevity is the name of the game. I don't know about you, but I want to be doing this when I'm 50, when I'm 60. So I always tell people, like, in addition to obviously squats are functional, they can be. Back squat isn't for everybody. It gets nuanced, but squats, deadlifts, things like that, always functional, right? Push-ups. But also I tell people, like, don't neglect your single leg work, your split squats, your single leg RDLs, things like that. As far as the upper body, same thing, unilateral work. So meaning like one arm, loaded carries, things of that nature. So just make sure, I always tell people 70%, let's say your program is the meat and potatoes, big compound lifts, few of those are functional. Make sure you're adding in some additional kind of supplementary functional movements, maybe some isolation work if that's what you want to do. Um, Well-rounded program with the focus in the right place. I discuss also how, I've personally gotten the most leg hypertrophy I've ever gotten out of heavy rear foot elevated split squats, skater squats with a weighted vest, more than I ever got when I was squatting my best, with bar on my back. Um, so just know that functional is not always just kind of the boring, oh, I keep healthy stuff. You can get jacked from doing the right stuff, especially if people are built different ways. I have long legs, so I tend to get better quad development from single leg movements. Um, Next thing, fourth thing, okay, it's kind of recapping so far. One, progressive overload, got to do it. Exercise science 101. Two, use the right training split. Most people don't do the bodybuilder splits, right? Worry about strength training 3-4 days a week. Three, choose the right exercises, mostly compound movements. Make sure you're getting some functional play in there. Number four, train to failure. Again, this is another very insidious one, like the training split, that I don't think a lot of people, even advanced people, understand. So again, some people can tolerate it and grow. I can't. I will honestly say I never trained to failure. Never in my life have I. So we distinguish in the article training to what's called technical versus mechanical failure. Okay. Technical failure is I can't do another rep with good form. Mechanical failure is I physically can't do another rep. We want to train up into the point of just at technical failure. Okay, so in this case, failure semantics. We can train to technical failure just shy of. We do not want to train at or into, especially mechanical failure. Okay, so I usually tell people a good rule of thumb for this is once you get to the point where, if you're doing an 8-rep set, your 8th rep should look largely like your first, albeit it's going to be a little slower and it's obviously going to be subjectively harder. Okay, but it should not be a grinder where you're shifting and turning and the bar's going crooked, right? That's essentially your past mechanical failure. You're knocking on the door of technical failure, and then obviously don't get to the point where you just can't push another one back up. You get stapled. Somebody's got to pull it off. People say, "Why? I thought you have to train like that." Okay, first of all, your favorite bodybuilder might train like that. I'd argue that they don't have to in many cases, but nonetheless, they do. Um, no power lifter trains like that, by the way. If your goal strength, especially, nobody trains like that. Missed reps are training to failure is training to fail, is the old saying. But bodybuilding, little different. Now, look, if you can tolerate, if you're advanced and you go to exhaustion on a curl every once in a while, okay, cool, right? You're going to recover from that. The reason we don't advise it, especially on bigger movements, is your nervous system, and if you're really pushing, stupidly, your joints are not going to recover from that kind of thing. It's incredibly taxing, especially to do it week in and week out. Again, once in a while, maybe, right? If you're testing maxes or something. But the nervous system is the name of the game for making goals. You have to be considering the fact that, again, your favorite bodybuilder is on a ton of gear. He's got insane genetics to begin with. That really, really matters more than you think it does. I think I touch on in the article, one of the previous sections, like most people understand that they're never going to run like their favorite NFL running back or dunk like their favorite NBA player. But for some reason they think that, so like they wouldn't even bother trying to train like that person because they know it wouldn't matter. But for some reason they think they could be their favorite bodybuilder. So if I train like that, it's like a kind of a gap in logic. They, just like your favorite running back or NBA player, have genetics that you don't have. Sorry, I don't have them either. Wish I did, don't. If you do, you'd know very young, trust me. So they're on a ton of gear, right? Them trained to fail. You also got to remember they eat, sleep, and breathe bodybuilding. It's their job. They're not dealing with their asshole boss at their 9 to 5 and the kids screaming and fighting with their girlfriend and getting poor sleep because shit hit the fan this week. Like bodybuilders live like monks. If you talk to really professional bodybuilders, right? They do everything for bodybuilding. It's just like a pro athlete. So you know, when you're just lifting and you're just trying to get better and you're also dealing with real life, you have to take these things into account. So we say technical failure. I always tell people a good rule of thumb is you want to stop 1 rep shy of, if I did another rep, either that grinder starts to happen, the form looks ugly, or I just can't get it up. That's the place you want to be. So on that last rep, I might finish, rack it, the set's done. So training to failure, don't do it. Technical failure, slight nuance, we can get there, we can get closer. We don't want to go to mechanical failure. Last point, the fifth piece of why your training program sucks is you are not taking the time to do a proper warm-up. This is another one. In all the commercial gyms I've trained in my life over 15-ish years, I probably have seen I can count on one hand the number of people that I've seen do a proper warm-up. Okay, so even most trainers, if you know me, you know that most trainers shouldn't have such a title. They think that I put you on a treadmill or we did some jumping jacks, we got your heart rate up, you're ready to go. You break a sweat, you're ready to go. That's not a warm-up. That might be getting your body physically warmed up. A warm-up, though, has components to it. And again, even if your goal is just, I just want to look better, I don't care about performing at my best or being my strongest, or I'm not in any pain. Number one, prehab is a real thing. We want to prevent pain, and establishing adequate joint mobility is going to do that. And number two, we want to make sure that we are activating the right motions of joints. I always tell people, muscles are a consequence of joints. So my pec can fire as well as my shoulder moves. Okay. If my shoulder has a mobility restriction, I've seen this, I have lived this myself when I was younger. I had years I struggled to grow a chest. I had terrible shoulder mobility and stability. I had terrible shoulder mobility, scapular stability. And once I kind of learned what I was doing, my chest growth skyrocketed. I could actually activate my chest better. I talk about in the article, another big place that shows up is with glutes. Most people have no clue how to actually extend their hip. They just extend with their spine. Can't grow your glutes if you can't extend your hip. So it's very important to note that, I talk about in the article, I break it down a little more, I actually give a YouTube link to kind of a beginner, what's called positional breathing exercise. So I talk about how most people aren't aware that your diaphragmatic position, the ability rather for your diaphragm to move and you to get full expansion of your rib cage is what actually sets the stage for everything else. Your rib cage, your spine, your pelvis, and then the way your joints, what we call centrate down and up the chain. So most people, again, on kind of piggybacking on, most people think, well, I got my heart rate up. A lot of people, especially if you're kind of type A, if you tend to be wound up, if you tend to be a go-getter, if you're really serious about the gym, a lot of people, we actually need to bring their nervous system down, contrary to what intuition would tell you when they come in the gym. We actually need to get them into some parasympathetic, right? We need to actually get some better breath expansion, and they're carrying a lot of stress from the day, right? We're going to end up taking their nervous system back up to train, but first we want to make sure, we get what we train, right? So if we're just always training a sympathetic nervous system, well, then you live in a sympathetic nervous system. We need to actually train parasympathetic, not just to get our rib cage, our diaphragm moving and get mobility globally, but also just to be able to train the body in and out of, we talk about heart rate variability. Most people know this is a metric, one of the key metrics for long-term health. Well, we need to understand that heart rate variability begins and ends really with sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system response. So I talk about positional breathing. I do talk about mobility for specific weak points, which you really need a proper assessment to determine. A lot of people, most people have some sort of mobility restriction at either the ankles, hips, thoracic spine, shoulder. These areas are all areas that need to be mobilized specifically. Again, mobility and stretching are not the same thing. stretching can be a component of mobility, but mobility is intentional, specific motions of joints. I want more shoulder flexion, I want more shoulder external rotation, I want more hip internal rotation, right? These are all things we have to identify, and then we design a warm-up specific to you. This is what I do with my clients. And this is one of the key places that my clients realize, oh my God, it feels so much better. My workouts are so much better. I get such better gains. Some of them connect, some of them don't right away. The warm-up is the key. I use this principle, could be just a warm up. I use this with rehab clients all the time, people who've been in chronic pain for 10 years. We go through some mobility that no one identified. They have terrible mobility. They've been doing these random stretches, random core activation drills, and we target the mobility to what they need from an assessment, and they feel better than they felt in 10 years. And then there's also the component of, along with just kind of general mobility, soft tissue work for a lot of people, right? So getting on a foam roller, getting on a lacrosse ball, kind of getting in some trigger points, right? Getting tissues, blood flow to tissues, right? Again, we get blood flow to tissues, that can help open up joints. So these things matter. And I always tell people, if you're a real serious lifter, you're probably going to want closer to 30 minutes, right? If some people more. At the peak of my powerlifting, I was probably warming up for 45 minutes. Not necessary though. I have most people try to get it in 15 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. It's worth it. You'll feel better. Your career, at your longevity period in every aspect of life will be far greater. You'll just feel better. You'll be able to be active far longer. You won't live in pain. And if you're just chasing aesthetic goals, for a lot of people, you will be able to feel muscles that you couldn't feel before. So not having a proper warm-up would be the fifth and final component of why your training program sucks. So just to recap, we hit 5 components of why your training program sucks and what you can do to make it better. And it's not ignore these 5 things. We have number 1, you must be progressively overloading. Number 2, you must be using an optimal training split. So for most people, that's going to be 3 or 4 days a week. Number 3, you got to be using the proper exercises, primarily compound movements with some focus on functionality. Number 4, you do not want to be training to failure. We want to be training to, right up into the point of what we call technical failure, not mechanical failure. And number 5, we want to make sure we're not neglecting a proper warm-up, including soft tissue work, mobility, and some positional breathing drills. All right, so that is going to wrap up my latest article. Again, you can find that article on covertfitwell.com, my website, or Substack at covertfitwell. Hope everybody enjoyed this video. If you are looking for some specifics, right, if you've been stuck for a while, a lot of this stuff can be difficult or confusing to apply, right? You can book a free consult with me, totally free, no risk to you. I'll give you a free assessment. I can at least tell you what's wrong, even if you don't choose to move forward with me. I can assess you, give you what I think is happening. Go to covertfitwell.com/contact, fill out that form. It'll come right to me. We'll get you scheduled. Anybody that just needs some, general pointers, has any questions, I'm always active in the comments. Please feel free. Like, share, subscribe this video if you did enjoy it. And I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one.